Hello, everyone, and welcome to 10 Questions with NBC10 Boston. My name is Kwani Lunis, and today we're going to be joined by Boston City Councilor Michelle Wu. So that should be a very interesting conversation. She should be in here shortly. If you don't know about her, oh, she's here already. Thank you all for joining. Hello.
Hey, Kwani, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. How's your
How's your day
Tuesday
going?
going?
Is it even any day anymore?
No, I don't even know why I asked that. All my days are a blur. How have you been over the last few weeks?
It's okay. I mean, it's just been so emotional for everyone, obviously, but I think, you know, in my household, I live in a two-family. My mom's downstairs. She struggles with some mental health challenges. I'm upstairs. My partner hasn't been able to work from home in a while. He's had to go back to work from the office full time for a long time now. So I'm here with the kids as we're balancing everything, and then just being part of how Boston should be part of this national conversation about changing the dynamic. Really addressing the issues that our society's been grappling with for so long. It's been a lot, but I'm now in a place where I feel like we have action steps and the energy is there, and so now it's about kind of turning it into real progress.
Right. You mentioned all of your family members that you're, helping out. Like, how have you been able to manage that even before the pandemic?
Yeah. It's been, I'm the oldest kid of four. My parents are both immigrants, and my parents separated and then divorced a while ago, and so my mom's been living with me and my sort of immediate family, my husband and my kids and me, for a little while now. We take each day as we're grateful for the blessings that we have, and I have family in the area as well, so everybody pitches in a little bit. It's been hard because everybody's been trying to stay distant and safe, but I think we see right now how much people have to rely on support structures like daycare, like school, and so it's definitely been a challenge.
You mentioned mental health, and this is actually one of my later questions, but I do want to just touch upon it a little bit right now. In the Boston Globe, you recently were able to open up, and you decided that you wanted people to feel more comfortable about talking about mental health. What inspired you to even be so open about your own personal journey?
It took me a long time to get to that point. My mom's mental health crisis came on about 12, 13 years ago at this point, and my sisters were still younger and in school at that point, and it kind of just turned all of our lives upside down. And yet, as much as we had to change everything we were doing, and I left my job and where I was living to move back in with my family and figure out how to stabilize everything, I still wasn't telling a whole lot of people about it because there was this sense of shame and just, did we do something wrong to be in the situation? And then every time we'd be at a hospital or even with certain mental health providers, it was kind of reinforced that, as a woman of color, and my mom was also a woman of color and an immigrant, it didn't feel like people were seeing her as a full person sometimes. And I think that spilled over onto us too. So it's taken a while for me to get to the place where I feel like we need to just own all of ourselves and our lives, and in doing so, hopefully empower other people to be able to speak up and at least feel like they're not alone and that they're seen and valued and treasured in our society.
Yeah, thank you for being so open about it, because as you know, you mentioned communities of color, it is very much stigmatized where you don't want to talk about mental health.
Yep.
You just don't want to cover that topic at all because, like
Yeah.
you said, you don't want to be perceived as crazy.
Yeah.
But moving on a little bit to the current events, we've seen all the young people that have been leading the charge when it comes to the protests over the last few weeks in light of George Floyd's death. What kind of change do you think will come from people exercising their right to protest?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back over the course of history in our country, it's clear every major advancement when it comes to protections and rights and freedoms and liberty always had young people at the front, right? So we know what the right side of history is here. We know what direction we have to move in. And it's sad that it came to this that it came to people taking the personal risk of coming together in huge crowds during a pandemic, right? The very thing we're not supposed to do.
Right.
But because it was it's just so outrageous where we are right now, that all the Black lives that had been lost to COVID, that clearly had not been protected, how disproportionate the impact when our healthcare system was going through a crisis. And then on top of that, when everything else was stopped, when planes were stopped and the economy was stopped, yet what kept going was state-sanctioned killing of Black men, right? And women too. So I think people are speaking up because of that we are now at the point where it's time, it's beyond time to figure out how we get rid of the real underlying virus in our country, which is racism.
Right. And you've been very vocal about defunding the police departments. How do you envision a future with defunded police departments?
Yeah, and I was having a conversation with some of the youth activists this morning, and a huge coalition where we were just really wanting to emphasize the idea that when people say defund, like, first of all, there's a whole bunch of a range of opinions of what folks actually mean, and I think some of us maybe aren't quite all the way there in terms of like full abolition of police and law enforcement and all that, and then there's a range of all the way up to we're reallocating resources. But no matter where you are on that range, what's clear, I think what everyone agrees on, is that we are not investing enough in communities, right? And it's a question of how do we want to prioritize the limited resources and the public dollars that we have. The first place that it should go probably shouldn't be to trying to solve problems way at the end after people have already been hurt, after when bringing in that kind of background also introduces a whole bunch of risks, particularly to communities of color, particularly to Black residents. So it's more about how do we set up the investments in what we want to see from the beginning, in public health, in housing stability, in food access, in mental health, in transit access. So there are a whole bunch of things where we just want to see a better representation of how we actually solve the underlying issues.
I saw that you submitted that 17F order, which is supposed to hold the city accountable for their military grade weapons, but especially the way that they've been using it against protesters. Why do you think that bill, or, why is it so important to police reform?
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, because I think this is one of the things that the city council, one of the tools that the city council has that nobody really knows about.
Yeah, I did some research on it.
It's called 17F, and everyone's like, what does that even mean? It's basically the equivalent of an internal subpoena between branches of government. So the city charter gives councilors the power to put forth what's called a 17F order, which requires the administration, the mayor and his administration, to respond to questions or information that we're asking for within 7 days. And if the council as a whole votes to pass that order on, the clock kind of starts ticking as soon as the administration receives it. They have 7 days to respond. And so a number of colleagues actually submitted different requests. One of the ones, as you mentioned, was from me to figure out what are we talking about specifically in terms of the militarization of Boston police. Or we know, again, Boston's part of this national conversation. We know that our public safety structures haven't been keeping everyone safe, particularly Black Americans. We know that our criminal justice system actually makes injustices worse for communities of color. So to break out of that system, though, we need to know kind of line by line, what are we talking about? It's not just the weapons and the vehicles, but tactics and training. What do we do? How are we encouraging our officers to interact with the community in a militarized way? And how has that all played out in the last decade or so? Have there been no-knock warrants that have been issued and enforced? And what are the demographics of the community members who were part of that? Have there been, what have we spent as taxpayers on either acquiring that equipment or, on executing all that stuff? So once we figure out how much we paid to get what we have, then I think it's a natural next conversation of, okay, well, what should we actually not have? And therefore maybe even could save some money and put it again to investing in community.
Right. And last week, Mayor Walsh actually declared racism as a public health crisis. He decided to transfer $3 million to, the Public Health Commission to make sure that they're trying to show that they're doing, trying to enact change a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we had the report today that said that 70% of
Yep.
Boston PD's people that they were stopping were Black Bostonians. So,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think this administration could do to actually enact some sustainable change?
Yeah, I want to give a huge shout out here to my colleague on the council, Ricardo Arroyo, because this is his first term on the council, but the very first speech that he gave from the council floor was asking the city to declare racism a public health crisis and take steps to address that. His idea was to have an office that's specifically focused on analyzing every policy, every program from the lens of racial equity, so that we know when we're making decisions that we're actually closing gaps and solving the problem, as opposed to maybe inadvertently making things worse. So he had done that back in March, way before the pandemic even started. So it's been nice to see his advocacy lifted up, and the solution that he lifted up then needs to be part of this current conversation too. For me, I think it's, again, going back to what are root causes of where we are now. Boston is one of the most unequal cities in the country, where we're doing great in a lot of ways if you look at the economy as a whole and averaging across everything. But just under the surface is our city's history struggling with racism, right, in a very public way that I would say hasn't been addressed fully. The legacy of what that meant for our school system and our housing, and the 30+ year difference in life expectancy, and the huge gaps in median net worth across Black families and white families in our city. So we basically know what the problems are, right? We even basically know how to solve them. It all comes down to building up the will and making the choice to do it. And that's one thing that's been really great in this pandemic, is seeing a whole bunch of issues and advocates have been pushing for years and years, and who had been told, oh, it's too expensive, not possible to feed everyone, to give everyone a laptop in Boston public schools. Yeah. Now we're doing it because we finally chose to address the problem.
And really had to, in a sense, too.
And had to, yeah.
Right. But you were the first woman of color to be the president of the Boston City Council. And to your point, it's like the history of Boston itself, it's taken that long for even a woman and a woman of color to be in a position like yourself. And now we're looking at the landscape of the country. How do you think that, specifically with Boston, have you seen the landscape of politics change now that more women are being asked to be at the table and, voted at the table?
Yeah, some of us are elbowing our way in too sometimes. Right. It's been amazing, actually, to see through Boston's example how fast you can change dynamics. You mentioned that little barrier that we broke down when I became council president in 2016, but it wasn't that long before that we had the first ever woman of color ever elected to the city council, right? When Ayanna Pressley got elected in 2009, it wasn't until then that we even had a woman of color serving on the Boston City Council. Right. And so I remember when I was running for office in 2013, Ayanna was the only woman serving on the 13-member council at all. And everyone kept telling me when I was running, you'll never get elected. You seem great, but you're, a woman of color. You weren't born here. You're too young. Like all these things that I couldn't change about myself. Right. And all of the reasons, all the questions that I got on the campaign trail were also very much, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? What neighborhood does your mom live in? Like sort of, right. Where do you fit into this idea of identity, right, and tribes defining whether you get to be part of the power structure or not? Mm-hmm. And fast forward to this last year's city elections in 2019, when, again, just 6 years after my first race, this last year, we elected the first ever majority people of color council, majority women on the council. And all the questions during the campaign cycle were really different too. Nobody was asking, what neighborhood do you live in and do you go to school and this and that. It was, what issues do you care about? What communities are you going to champion? What actions are you going to take? And I think that quick reinforcing of changing the political atmosphere with people who don't look like the usual structure running, then bringing issues then, more people saying, hey, maybe it's possible for Boston to elect others. So I'm going to support this other, activist who's coming out to run for office. And then more activists saying, hey, they've been successful. Why don't I think about doing this when I never saw myself in that role before? And it only took 6 years for us to go from 1 woman on the council to 8.
And sadly, like you said, it always takes one person. I hate the term, it's the token, right? You have that person that was able to prove that, oh, women can do this. So let's have them. We'll invite a little bit more of them to the table. But you look at Joe Biden, he mentioned that he wants to have a woman as his VP, but now people are calling on him to have a person of color. From your perspective, what do you think is the best fit for the White House right now? What does the White House need?
Yeah, I was really active this last presidential campaign cycle as a former student of Senator Elizabeth Warren's, and I got my start working for her on her first Senate campaign. So it was, I'm cognizant of how important it is to get this done in November, right? And I know we're not here to talk partisan politics, but so much is at stake at the federal level and how that affects state and local for this November. And the disaster that we will face if what we have now continues, it's just unimaginable. So, we all need to do whatever we can do to make sure that people come out to vote and truly exercise their rights this November. And I think there's still a lot of questions about what that looks like during a pandemic and what the sort of current status quo is going to try to do to maybe tip the scales in their favor with, with this current pandemic. But I will say honestly that I was pretty disappointed towards the end of the sort of Democratic nominating process when we saw a field that had included so many younger candidates of color vying to be president, candidates that were outside the mold and talking about the issues. And so I hope that we'll get there soon at the federal level as well and see some of this excitement that we've been experiencing in Boston. But it does make a difference for people to be at the table who represent communities who haven't had seats at that table before and people who can really bring in community with them. It's not so much about, who the electeds are and what they believe as people and what their own, what boxes they check or whatever. It's about who feels like they're now connected to government because that person is opening up the door and bringing all these chairs to the table with them.
Bringing it back to the local level, we look at the leadership here in Massachusetts, the New England area, when it came to the pandemic. But unfortunately, it seemed like it was the fact that the pandemic hit communities of color the hardest. Do you think that the city is doing enough for those communities?
No, and it's frustrating to see still that we are having conversations from the frame of, oh, okay, do we make a decision that's best for public health, or do we make a decision that's best for the economy? And not just policymakers feeling like they're framing it feeling like they need to make that decision and individual people making that decision because we haven't stepped up to provide protections to eliminate that choice. It's a false choice. If we had testing and contact tracing, we would know how to open up 100% safely, right? If we had resources to give to any childcare center or advocacy organization that needed personal protective equipment to open, then workers wouldn't feel like they were putting themselves at risk by going. If we had paid leave and protections for every worker, then individuals wouldn't be struggling with this choice of, okay, I don't feel so well, but I know if I don't go in, I'm going to maybe lose my job or at least lose my pay. So I'm weighing whether I do the right thing for myself and my coworkers. These are just unfair and unnecessary decisions that government should be providing more of a solution and support for.
What do you think that leadership looks like moving forward? How do you implement change?
It's about being intentional, right? Defining the scope of the problem that we're trying to solve, and then getting the public will and bringing people to the table to figure out the steps to get there. And what I mean is this, that, I think in the course of this pandemic, at the city level have been trying to supplement things that are happening at the state and federal level. We've created some of these relief funds that are meant to help renters or businesses or just support efforts, recovery efforts in general. But the ways of distributing the funds haven't necessarily helped close the gaps and bring about the equity that we know should be the focus right now. And when you distribute money either by a lottery or first come, first serve, and there's not enough support relative to the need that's out there, of course, the people that are left out are the ones who most need the help because they weren't even connected enough to know that you could apply for this or to get their application in on time or didn't have access to the translated materials until later into the process. So I think it's really about saying, what are we trying to do, right? If it is that we're trying to protect, support, keep, just try to save Black-owned businesses in Boston, what does that mean we need to do? How many are there? What would it take? And then how can we try to piece together a pathway to get there?
You mentioned this briefly before, the fact that people always question, you're not from here, you're from Chicago, but you went to school here, so it's you've been here long enough. When you look at all the things that you've done with the Boston City Council and you look forward to your career, what is one thing that you envision for the city of Boston when you eventually retire?
I hope that everyone feels connected to each other and to government. And I think that's all it is. We're lucky in Boston that we have the resources to solve any problem that needs solving. It's never a matter of where can we find the funding or support. It's never a matter of we don't know what to do. We don't have the expertise. They're some of the smartest people in the world here. And it's never a matter of, no one's engaged enough to actually keep this going on the community side. I'm sure that we have more neighborhood associations and volunteer organizations per capita than anywhere in the country. And people are throwing their time into taking care of issues. So it's just about getting everyone on the same page and feeling like when they advocate, it makes a difference, that they're heard, that it matters, and then they can actually bring about change at the local level. So I think we're starting to see that transformation with this political transformation at the council. I don't know if you can hear my little one banging at the door back there. But for everyone to feel like no matter what neighborhood they live in, what background, what their first language was, that they have a role and they have power relative to city government to make a difference.
I like that. I want to end on a lighter note because we did talk a lot of politics, but obviously we're slowly transitioning into the new normal. But when you were stuck at home in quarantine, did you pick up any new books, new movies, new hobbies? Did you even have time?
Okay. Yeah, it's been hard because it's just nonstop with the kids. So I had started doing this thing where, again, because I've been doing a lot of it just at home. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna bring you with me and just open up this door. Someone's banging at the door.
Get in the babies, Afro Latina.
To say okay, I needed some time at the beginning of the day. Popped out of the tripod. Needed some time at the beginning of the day to just get some thinking done, get some reading done before the kids wake up. So yeah. I've never been an early morning person. My philosophy always has been, okay, well, they're going to wake me up no matter what, so I might as well try to sleep as much as I can until then. But to even have an hour before that of quiet and to reset, and it's been pretty transformative. And so, I tried to avoid getting sucked into too many series that are a long time. We did watch all of The Last Dance, and as a
nice.
Chicago
good choice. Oh yeah, you're
90s Chicago girl. Yeah. It was amazing to see. But it's been fun, and just being around to notice how fast kids grow up, right? When you're there with them every day and not just kind of rushing them off,
throwing them to school.
Yeah, so it's been good and bad. I certainly in some ways can't wait until daycare opens back up again.
Right.
But it's been a blessing in some ways too. Yeah, we've been very, very blessed and privileged to be able to have this time.
Thank you so much, Michelle Wu, the Boston City Council. I really appreciate you giving us some time today.
Thanks, Connie. It was so fun to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Bye.